Krelix moved through the shadows of his ship, his movements precise and deliberate. His species, the Kareen, had a reputation for being the most efficient killers in the galaxy, and Krelix was their finest product. His body, a sleek blend of organic and synthetic enhancements, moved with a grace that belied the deadly power it contained. His mind, honed by years of training and countless successful missions, was a cold, calculating machine. He had never failed a mission, and he did not intend to start now. The holographic image of his mission coordinator flickered to life in the darkened room. The being's face, a blur of indistinct features, spoke in a voice devoid of emotion. "Krelix, your next target is a human." Krelix's eyes narrowed slightly. A human? He had faced far more dangerous species before, each one falling before his meticulous planning and superior skills. Humans were known for their unpredictability, their resourcefulness, but they were still just flesh and blood, easily broken by the right application of force. The coordinator continued, "This human is different. He has become a significant threat to the stability of the galactic order. Your mission is to eliminate him." Krelix tilted his head, considering the implications. The Kareen rarely involved themselves in the politics of other species, but when they did, it meant the target was a genuine problem. Still, Krelix felt no concern. He had faced threats before, more formidable creatures, more cunning adversaries. This would be no different. "The details of the mission are limited," the coordinator admitted. "But you must understand, Krelix, this human is not an ordinary target. He has evaded capture and assassination attempts from several other species. His survival instincts are exceptional." Krelix suppressed a scoff. Survival instincts were no match for his methods. He had dismantled entire governments, wiped out the most elusive of prey, all with the precision of a surgeon and the detachment of a machine. A human, regardless of his instincts, would be no different. "Understood," Krelix replied, his voice a low, measured tone. "Consider it done." The coordinator's form flickered again, almost as if hesitating. "There is something else. We have received reports that this human possesses unusual abilities. Our information is incomplete, but there is a pattern of inexplicable outcomes in his encounters." Krelix's interest piqued slightly. "What kind of abilities?" "Unknown," the coordinator responded. "But I must caution you, Krelix. Do not underestimate this target." The words lingered in the air as the hologram faded, leaving Krelix in the silence of his ship. He had heard similar warnings before. Every mission came with its risks, but he had never encountered a situation he couldn't control. The human would be hunted, just like all the others. Krelix initiated the landing sequence, his ship descending toward the planet where his target was last seen. As the ship cut through the atmosphere, Krelix reviewed what little data he had on the human, Jason. The name meant nothing to him, just another piece of information in a file. What mattered was the location, the habits, the patterns that would lead to the kill. As he prepared to embark, a faint doubt crept into his mind, a whisper of the warnings given by the coordinator. But Krelix pushed it aside. Fear and doubt were for the weak, and he was anything but. His record spoke for itself, an unbroken string of successful missions, each one executed with flawless precision. Landing on the planet's surface, Krelix blended into the environment, his advanced camouflage rendering him nearly invisible. The landscape was unfamiliar, but that was irrelevant. The hunt was what mattered, and Krelix was already mapping out the most likely paths his target would take. As he moved through the dense foliage, his senses extended, picking up every minute detail of the surroundings. His equipment scanned for life signs, his mind calculated the probabilities. Everything was in place for a swift and decisive hunt. But as Krelix moved deeper into the forest, a small, nagging thought refused to leave him. The human had evaded others, had survived against odds that should have been insurmountable. What made this human so special? What did he know that others did not? Krelix shook his head slightly, dismissing the thought as irrelevant. The human's previous victories were inconsequential. Krelix was not like the others who had failed. He was a Kareen assassin, trained to adapt, to overcome any obstacle. This mission would be no different. Yet, as he continued his search, the forest seemed to close in around him, the shadows deepening, the silence growing more oppressive. There was a tension in the air, a sense of being watched, hunted. Krelix's instincts told him to be cautious, but his training demanded that he push forward. The mission coordinator's final words echoed in his mind. "Do not underestimate this target." Krelix's jaw tightened. He would not fail. He could not fail. But for the first time in his career, Krelix felt a sliver of uncertainty. It was fleeting, barely noticeable, but it was there, a small, unwelcome seed of doubt that had taken root. Pushing through the underbrush, Krelix knew that the hunt had already begun. But this time, something was different. The human was not just a target. He was an adversary, and the outcome of this mission was no longer a foregone conclusion. Krelix moved silently through the forest, every step calculated, every breath controlled. But the doubt remained, a whisper in the back of his mind. He was hunting a human, a creature that, until now, he had considered inferior, predictable. But as the darkness of the forest deepened, Krelix couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one being hunted. Krelix's ship settled silently onto the forest floor, its landing masked by advanced stealth technology. The environment was unlike any he had encountered before, dense, chaotic, and filled with unfamiliar sounds and scents. The trees towered above, their thick canopies casting long shadows that danced across the undergrowth. The air was heavy with moisture, the scent of earth and vegetation overwhelming his senses. Krelix activated his camouflage, his form blending seamlessly into the surroundings, rendering him nearly invisible to the naked eye. As he stepped out into the forest, his movements were careful, deliberate. The ground beneath his feet was soft, the soil damp from recent rainfall, making his steps soundless. The forest seemed alive, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, a potential signal. Krelix's eyes scanned the area, his mind mapping out the terrain. He noted the irregularities in the landscape, the potential hiding spots, the paths of least resistance that his target might take. His equipment began its work, scanning for signs of life, tracking minute disturbances in the environment that could indicate human presence. It didn't take long for him to pick up on a faint trail, a series of disturbances in the vegetation, slight but noticeable to his trained eye. Jason was here, moving through this forest, unaware that the galaxy's most lethal assassin was on his trail. Or so Krelix thought. As he followed the trail, Krelix marveled at how the human had managed to survive this long. The trail was faint, almost as if Jason knew exactly how to move without leaving traces. Krelix's frustration began to simmer, but he quickly quelled it. He had faced elusive targets before, and each time, he had succeeded. This would be no different. But as the minutes turned to hours, Krelix began to notice something unsettling. The trail would grow stronger, more obvious, only to suddenly disappear altogether. It was as if Jason was playing a game, leading him on, only to vanish at the critical moment. Krelix's confidence wavered slightly, but he pushed forward, determined to complete his mission. Suddenly, through the trees, he caught a glimpse of movement, quick, almost imperceptible, but enough to confirm his suspicions. Jason was close. Krelix's heart rate quickened as he moved silently, his body low to the ground, every muscle coiled, ready to strike. His weaponry was primed, advanced targeting systems locked onto the area where he had seen the movement. This would be the moment. As he closed in, Krelix prepared to unleash a precise, lethal strike. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, something unexpected happened. The ground beneath him shifted, a hidden trap triggered by his weight. In an instant, Krelix found himself tangled in a complex web of vines and branches, his advanced system struggling to compensate for the sudden entanglement. Before he could react, Jason appeared, just on the edge of his vision. The human moved with an unexpected swiftness, not away from the trap, but toward it. Krelix, caught off guard, barely managed to free himself from the tangle in time to see Jason disappear into the dense foliage. The entire ambush had been reversed, Krelix the one left vulnerable, exposed. The shock of the failed ambush coursed through Krelix. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, an emotion he had never associated with a mission. Doubt. How had a human, a supposedly inferior being, turned the tables on him so easily? Krelix quickly recalculated, his mind racing to rationalize the situation. This was just a fluke, an anomaly. The human had gotten lucky, but luck wouldn't save him again. Krelix refocused, his movements now more cautious, every step more calculated. He would not allow Jason to escape again. But as he resumed the hunt, the forest seemed to grow darker, more oppressive, as if the very environment was conspiring against him. The sounds of the forest grew louder in his ears, every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves setting his nerves on edge. The realization began to sink in, this was not the hunt he had expected. Jason was not running, not in the way Krelix had anticipated. The human was leading him, drawing him deeper into the forest, into unfamiliar territory. Krelix's confidence, so unshakable at the start, was beginning to erode. He pressed on, determined to regain control. But the further he went, the more elusive Jason became, slipping through Krelix's grasp at every turn. Each time Krelix thought he had the human cornered, Jason would find a way to escape, using the terrain to his advantage in ways Krelix hadn't anticipated. The human's resourcefulness was unlike anything Krelix had encountered before. This was no ordinary prey. Krelix's mind raced, trying to adapt, to anticipate Jason's next move. But the human seemed to be always one step ahead, anticipating Krelix's actions before he even made them. The chase had turned into a game of cat and mouse, but Krelix was no longer certain who was the cat and who was the mouse. As night began to fall, Krelix found himself in a small clearing, the sky above barely visible through the thick canopy. The air was still, the silence almost deafening. Krelix's sensors picked up no sign of Jason, no movement, no heat signature, nothing. It was as if the human had vanished into thin air. For the first time in his career, Krelix felt truly uncertain. The forest around him seemed to close in, the once predictable patterns of the hunt now muddled, confused. He had underestimated Jason, just as the mission coordinator had warned him not to do. And now, he was paying the price. But Krelix was not ready to concede defeat. He was a Korean, the best of his kind. He would find Jason, and he would finish this. With renewed determination, he prepared to continue the hunt. But deep down, Krelix knew that this mission had become something far more dangerous than he had ever anticipated. Krelix's patience wore thin as the hours dragged on. His usual tactics, which had never failed him before, seemed useless in this unyielding environment. Jason was always just out of reach, slipping away at the last possible moment, leaving behind only faint traces that mocked Krelix's abilities. The alien assassin, now more determined than ever, decided to escalate his approach. No more subtlety. This human had forced his hand. He activated advanced weaponry, deploying drones equipped with thermal imaging and motion sensors to sweep the area. These drones were his most sophisticated tools, designed to track and neutralize any life form with precision. Yet, despite their capabilities, they returned nothing, no sign of Jason. Krelix clenched his jaw, his frustration mounting. How was this human evading technology that had been developed to subdue the galaxy's most dangerous species? Switching tactics, Krelix began to use the environment against Jason, setting traps, laying out ambush points, and employing shock tactics meant to disorient and corral his prey. But every time he closed in, Jason found a way out, using the terrain with an expertise that Krelix had not anticipated. The forest, with its dense undergrowth and winding paths, became an ally to the human, not the hunter. As the hunt stretched into what felt like an endless cycle, something shifted in Krelix's mind. The calculations, the certainty, the cold efficiency, everything began to unravel. He felt a tightness in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in all his years of assassinations. It was fear. It crept in slowly, gnawing at his confidence with each failed attempt to capture the human. Memories from past missions flashed through his mind, missions where he had been in complete control, his targets falling one by one with minimal effort. The ease with which he had completed those assignments now contrasted starkly with his current predicament. Those were victories, clean and predictable. But here, in this forsaken forest, the rules had changed. He was no longer the predator. Jason had somehow turned the tables, and Krelix found himself in unfamiliar territory, both physically and mentally. In a moment of clarity, Krelix realized the truth: he was being hunted. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Jason was not running from him. He was leading him, drawing him deeper into the forest, into traps and ambushes that left Krelix scrambling to survive. The human was playing a game, and Krelix was the unwitting participant, always a step behind, always reacting instead of controlling. Krelix's frustration boiled over into desperation as he pushed forward, determined to regain control. His every movement became more frantic, his actions less calculated. The meticulous planning and precise execution that had once defined him were slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of panic. He needed to end this, and soon, or he would lose more than just the mission, he would lose himself. Then it happened. Krelix, moving through the forest with heightened vigilance, caught a glimpse of Jason. The human was close, closer than Krelix had anticipated, and for a moment their eyes met. In that instant, Krelix saw something that shook him to his core, a knowing smile. Jason wasn't just surviving. He was thriving, relishing the challenge, playing a game that Krelix hadn't even realized he was a part of. Krelix lunged forward, weapon at the ready, but Jason was faster, slipping into the shadows with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. Krelix pursued, his heart pounding, his vision narrowing as he focused solely on capturing his target. But just as he thought he had Jason cornered, the human vanished again, leaving only silence in his wake. And then a voice. Calm, measured, with a hint of amusement. "Is this your first time hunting a human? You should run while you still can." The words hung in the air, echoing in Krelix's mind long after the sound had faded. Jason had left him a message, not just in words, but in action. Krelix had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and the human was fully aware of it. The realization that Jason was enjoying this, that he was toying with Krelix, sent a chill down the assassin's spine. Krelix's fear transformed into something darker, desperation. This was no ordinary mission, and Jason was no ordinary target. He was an adversary, a force that Krelix had severely underestimated. The confidence that had once fueled Krelix was now in shambles, replaced by a gnawing dread that threatened to consume him. He had never failed before, but now, for the first time, failure seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The forest around him, once a mere backdrop to his mission, now felt like a living entity, conspiring with Jason to trap him, to wear him down. Krelix could no longer tell if the sounds he heard were real or a product of his increasingly frayed nerves. The hunt had become a nightmare, with no clear path to victory, only the looming specter of defeat. Krelix's breath came in shallow, ragged bursts as he realized the truth that he had been avoiding since the beginning of this mission. Jason was not just a human. He was a hunter, as skilled and as deadly as Krelix, if not more so. And in this twisted game, Krelix was no longer the predator. He was the prey. Krelix's every step was a gamble now, each decision fraught with doubt. The forest, once merely a backdrop to his hunt, had become a labyrinth of treachery. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind set his nerves on edge. He had once moved through such environments with confidence, but now he found himself hesitating, second-guessing each choice. His mind, once a precision instrument, now churned with paranoia. Was that shadow Jason? Was the path ahead a trap? The certainty that had always defined him was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. His advanced sensors were no longer reliable, the environment seemingly conspiring with Jason to mislead him. Krelix could feel the tension in the air, the oppressive weight of the forest pressing down on him. It was as if the very ground beneath his feet had turned against him, shifting and changing at Jason's whim. The forest, once a neutral territory, was now Jason's weapon, and Krelix was stumbling blindly through it. Despite the creeping fear, Krelix pushed on. He couldn't afford to stop. He couldn't afford to think. Thinking led to doubt, and doubt led to mistakes. But the mistakes were happening anyway. He moved too quickly, setting off traps he would have easily avoided before. He fired at shadows, wasting precious energy. Each misstep added to his frustration, each failure driving him deeper into desperation. Then, through the thick underbrush, Krelix finally spotted his target. Jason stood at the edge of a clearing, seemingly unaware of Krelix's approach. The sight of the human ignited a spark of hope in Krelix's chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He could end this now, reclaim his pride, and put an end to the nightmare. Krelix moved swiftly, his advanced technology springing into action. In an instant, he had Jason cornered, his weaponry locked onto the human. But as he prepared to strike, something in Jason's demeanor gave him pause. The human wasn't afraid. He wasn't panicked. Instead, there was a calmness, a quiet confidence that unsettled Krelix more than anything else had. Before Krelix could react, Jason moved with a speed and precision that defied his expectations. The human's tactics were crude by Korean standards, but they were effective. Jason didn't rely on advanced weaponry or superior strength. Instead, he used the environment, exploiting every weakness in Krelix's position. What Krelix had assumed was an ambush of his own making had turned into a deadly game, with Jason controlling every move. The battle was brutal, both sides taking heavy damage. Krelix's advanced armor was scarred and battered, his weapons depleted. Jason fought with an intensity that Krelix hadn't anticipated, his every move calculated to counter Krelix's strengths. Krelix was stronger, faster, better equipped, but Jason was relentless, using every trick, every tactic to wear him down. Krelix's vision blurred as blood from a wound on his forehead dripped into his eyes. His breathing was labored, every breath a struggle as his body pushed beyond its limits. He had never been pushed this far before, never felt the sting of desperation as acutely as he did now. But Jason was unrelenting, his attacks coming faster, harder, each one driving Krelix closer to the edge. Finally, with a swift, decisive move, Jason disarmed Krelix, sending the Korean's weapon clattering to the ground. Krelix fell to his knees, his body battered, his mind reeling. He had lost. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He, the greatest assassin of his species, had been defeated by a human. As he knelt there, defenseless and broken, Krelix looked up at Jason, expecting the final blow. But instead of finishing him, Jason stepped back, lowering his weapon. The human's eyes, sharp and unwavering, held no malice, only a calm certainty. Jason's voice was steady, almost soft as he spoke. "Tell them humans are not prey." The words cut deeper than any wound. Krelix, stunned and disoriented, could only watch as Jason disappeared into the forest, leaving him alone in the clearing. The silence that followed was deafening, the reality of his defeat settling over him like a shroud. Krelix was left with nothing but his failure. The wounds on his body would heal, but the wounds to his pride, to his belief in his own invincibility, were deeper, more painful. He had underestimated Jason, underestimated humans, and now he would have to return to his people with the truth. As he struggled to his feet, every movement a reminder of his defeat, Krelix knew that his life would never be the same. He had been broken, not just physically, but mentally. The hunter had become the hunted, and in that transformation, Krelix had lost everything that had once defined him. With a final, shaky breath, Krelix began the long, painful journey back to his ship, his mind replaying Jason's words over and over. "Tell them humans are not prey." He would carry that message back, not just as a warning, but as a testament to his own downfall. Krelix's return to his homeworld was nothing like the triumphant homecomings he had experienced in the past. The journey back was a silent one, marked by the weight of his failure pressing down on him. The once proud assassin, the unstoppable force of the Korean, was now a shadow of his former self. His body bore the scars of the brutal confrontation, but the real wounds were deeper, etched into his very soul. As he stepped off his ship, the familiar sights of his world offered no comfort. The towering spires, the bustling streets, the cold, metallic landscape, all of it felt alien to him now. The sense of belonging he had once felt was gone, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. His arrival did not go unnoticed. The eyes of his fellow Kareen were upon him, filled with curiosity, and soon disbelief. Word of Krelix's defeat spread quickly, and it wasn't long before he was summoned to face his superiors. The room was cold, austere, designed to intimidate, but Krelix felt none of it. He was beyond fear now. What he felt was far worse, a profound sense of failure that no amount of punishment could erase. His superiors, the Council of Elders, regarded him with a mix of disbelief and anger. They demanded an explanation, refusing to accept that a human, a species they had always considered inferior, could defeat one of their best. Krelix, standing before them, could offer no excuses, no justifications. The truth was simple, undeniable. He had been outmatched. The council's reaction was swift and brutal. Krelix was stripped of his rank, his honors erased from the records as if they had never existed. He was branded a failure, a disgrace to his people. The weight of their judgment was heavy, but Krelix bore it in silence. He knew there was nothing he could say that would change what had happened. Ostracized, Krelix found himself isolated from the society he had once been a part of. His former allies turned away, unwilling to associate with the disgraced assassin. But what troubled Krelix more than his fall from grace was the fear that now gripped him, fear of humans, a fear he could not shake. He had seen firsthand what they were capable of, not just physically, but mentally. Their unpredictable nature, their relentless determination, these were traits that made them far more dangerous than his people had ever imagined. As the story of Krelix's defeat spread, it sparked a quiet undercurrent of fear among the Kareen. Whispers filled the air, cautioning against future encounters with humans. The idea that a species they had always dismissed as weak could pose such a threat was unsettling, and it began to erode the confidence of even the most seasoned warriors. The legend of Krelix's downfall became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the galaxy was filled with unknown dangers, and that no species should be underestimated. In the solitude of his exile, Krelix had little to do but reflect. The hunt that had shattered his life replayed in his mind over and over, every moment dissected, every mistake magnified. He could not escape the memory of Jason, the human who had bested him. It was not Jason's physical strength that had won the day, it was his mind, his ability to adapt, to think several steps ahead, to turn a dire situation into an opportunity. Krelix realized that this was what made humans truly formidable. Their unpredictability, their refusal to give up even when the odds were against them, these were the traits that had undone him. As days turned into weeks, Krelix began to understand that the danger humans posed was not something that could be easily quantified or countered. They were not prey, as his people had believed, but a force to be reckoned with. Krelix had learned this lesson too late, but it was a lesson that would change the way his people viewed the galaxy. The realization left Krelix hollow. He had been one of the most feared assassins in the galaxy, and now he was nothing more than a broken warrior, haunted by the knowledge that he had underestimated his enemy. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding respect for a species he had once dismissed. As he stood alone in the darkness, Krelix contemplated his future. There was no place for him among his people now, no purpose to guide him. The life he had known was over, and what lay ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear, he could not return to who he had been. The hunt had changed him, fundamentally, irrevocably. In the quiet of his exile, Krelix accepted the truth that had been gnawing at him since his defeat. He had learned a lesson that his people would do well to heed. Humans were not to be underestimated. They were not prey, but predators in their own right, capable of turning the tables on even the most formidable foes. And as Krelix faced the bleak future before him, he knew that this lesson would haunt him for the rest of his days.